kids, because there's like a couple kids that would just say, you're like trying to, you're like, oh, that's the chemistry, and then you're like, yeah. I don't know what's going No, I don't.
How do they get their slides up for their group? We could also,
Might have to just share.
also just add these, their slides in this presentation. So you don't have to switch.
Yeah. Let's just go ahead and do it normal way.
Well, but I'm trying to keep it for you guys. No way, guys, that's me. The one in the waiters. Yeah, hey guys, I feel so good. Yeah. I'm gonna come up and just, yeah. And I'm like, oh, I stand there, you know, right? And I just like awkwardly stand there, so you like do your speech. And then I go, yeah, and I just like, it's super.
All right, everyone, it's 7 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank you all for being here, especially the 1 week class. Before we get to our headliner, we're doing something a little special tonight. If you haven't noticed, we have 4 undergrad students that are here. They're not in classes, but are taking. I'm hearing an echo somewhere. Is that your phone, Brian? Yeah. Okay. There are 4 RU students here, research experience for undergrads. They're not taking any classes. They're here doing research for 8 weeks. So they arrived when the first 4-week session came in. They're at week 4 of week 8, so they're halfway through. In 4 weeks, on the last week of classes up here, the RU students will be the guest speaker. So tonight they're going to give everyone a 1-minute update. Thanks, Curtis, for Bill for the idea here. And also that was a good idea because there's students, 4-week students that are leaving Saturday or Sunday. And then there's students in 6-week classes that showed up 2 weeks ago. So we want to give everyone an introduction to what the RU students are doing. They're going to do 1 slide, 1-minute presentations on what they're doing. They picked the order. So Hannah will be the first to come up. And there will be no questions from the audience during these 4 presentations. If you got any questions, log on, either be here in person, July 23rd-ish, whatever that Thursday is, or log on to Zoom. Okay.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah. I'm studying the impact of microplastics on fish, specifically their physiological response. So as you can see, Lake Erie has a lot of plastic in it, which isn't great, and it negatively impacts our fish. So what I'm doing is feeding fish varying concentrations of these microplastic pellets. You can see here that I then put into a worm and I feed the fish. And we take a blood sample after 2 days and 2 weeks to see whether or not the fish are showing an immune response by measuring 5 different parameters in their blood. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Uh-oh. That's fine. Thanks, Bob.
Hey, Elliot. Okay.
My name is Elliot. I'm a student at OSU, and I've been looking at the bats here on Lake Erie, specifically seeing what kind of stuff they eat on South Bass Island. I've been collecting bugs every night for the past 4 weeks, seeing what kinds of diversity of bugs are in different habitats on South Bass Island. And simultaneously, we're doing acoustic bat monitoring, which is monitoring the sound of their calls to see how often they're eating and where they're located. And we're going to compare that data to see if they have a preference for taxonomic groups of insects or habitat.
Hello, everyone. I'm Grayson. I am studying the algal blooms here on Lake Erie. They're mostly predominant by cyanobacteria, which are generalists and are able to survive lots of different conditions. But the other algae is my focal point because not much research has been done on this. So what we're doing is take an experimental approach. We take ambient nutrients and adding excess nutrients to see how the concentration changes over hours 0, 48, and 72, which then we can calculate the growth rate and see how different environmental factors and cyanobacteria affect the different growth rates of different algae.
Hello, I'm Anna. I go to the University of Montana. I'm studying the threatened Lake Erie channel darter here. I'm working with Brian this summer. We are going out to different places on the Lake Erie Islands, and we are looking for presence and numbers of the Lake Erie channel darter. And with this information, we're going to be estimating population densities and relative abundance of these animals. And we're doing this so that the Ohio Department of Natural Resources can create a conservation plan in order to help protect these species. We're also looking for the common log perch and the Johnny darter, which are other species of darters here in the lake. And we're doing this by seining and by VAE tagging. So this is visual implant elastomer. It's just a little bright yellow or bright pink thing that we put into the dorsal fin, and we snorkel and go look for them again so we can use that data to have a recapture estimate. So that's what we're doing.
Right, yeah, so thanks to all you, and if you're interested more, listen in 4 weeks, you'll get the whole presentation, the results, conclusions, and you'll be able to ask them questions in a conference style setting, like conference-like setting. Right, thank you.
Brian's phone actually made me change.
Before this, they did a practice and everyone was going well over a minute.
Go back one.
Go back one. There. we go. This works.
Okay, great.
So.
Okay.
Right after you go to. Let me introduce you. It's my very distinct pleasure to introduce a very far away guest this week. Most of our guests have been from Ohio. But this week we have Sarah Spiegler, who is with North Carolina Sea Grant, one of our Sea Grant partners, except on the coast. She is going to share her story about how she came to be at the job that she has and her passion for coastal resilience in the face of changing weather patterns in our world today. So without further ado, Sarah, glad to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here. Again, my name's Sarah Spiegler. I'm with North Carolina Sea Grant. I'm the Coastal Resilience Specialist, and I am located in our NC State Marine Lab in Morehead City. And I'm very excited to be here because I am actually a native Ohioan. And so I grew up in about an hour down the road, take the ferry about an hour east of Cleveland in Shaker Heights. So very excited to speak to you all today. And this photo here is from my new hometown, Beaufort, North Carolina. And yes, those are wild horses. And that is the Rachel Carson Reserve, which is adjacent to the town that I live in. So today I was asked to actually start by talking to you about how I got here and sort of my background, how I got to the grant. So I'm going to talk tonight for I think about 30-ish minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for y'all to ask questions. So I'll go through this kind of quickly, but at the end, if you want to ask me more questions about how I got here, I'm perfectly willing to talk more and share my email afterwards as well. Oh, why is it? Okay. So again, I'm from Shaker Heights, and I'm a graduate of Shaker Heights High School. I was not a student here at the Stone Lab. I did not even know about it actually as a high school student. So that's okay. I'm sure I would have loved it here. After that, I went on to Kenyon College, which is in Ohio. It's about an hour northeast of Columbus, and I was a biology major there. But I've always been a water person. I love the water. I love the ocean. I love the freshwater lakes. And so I did do a study abroad program in Australia when I was in college at the University of Queensland, did conservation biology, marine biology, and that was pretty life-changing for me because I was like, yes, this is what I want to do. And then I came back to Ohio where there's, not really marine biology, but there is this fabulous facility here at the Stone Lab. So that's really neat. Graduated from college. I heard somebody ask me at dinner tonight, when did you know what you wanted to do? Did you know what you wanted to do when you went to college or when you graduated? And I'll say I had no idea what I wanted to do. And it took me a really long time to figure out what my passion was and how to apply it. However, I'll say now as an extension specialist, I think if I had known that this career had existed when I was a kid, I would have said, yes, that is what I want to do. But I didn't know it existed until, after I went to graduate school. So after college, I worked a couple of different jobs. I worked at the VA Medical Center in Cleveland. I was a research technician in a biomedical research lab. And I'll tell you, that was definitely not my passion, because you kind of do this, right? And you don't really talk to people. That was not for me. I'll just put it that way. But it was a really, really, really good experience, because I realized that I didn't want to do bench and lab science. I wanted to do something else with people, with the environment. So I think sometimes figuring out what you don't want to do is just as important as figuring out what you do want to do. So after that, I did I think it was a 6-month internship with the ODNR. I was one of the creel clerks on Lake Erie. And so what I did is I drove my car up and down the lakefront in downtown Cleveland, and I interviewed the fishermen, and I got to check what fish they had in their coolers. And I thought that was just like the best job, getting to be outside, talking to people, being on Lake Erie. And so that sort of pushed me into graduate school. So I went to Duke University for my master's degree. My first year was spent on main campus. My second year was at the Duke Marine Lab. And that was just awesome, because as you've heard, I really like marine biology. So I have my master's degree in environmental management and coastal management. And as part of my master's degree, I also spent time in South Louisiana. And I was at the LumCon Marine Lab down there. And that internship was also very pivotal for me, because that's the first time that I was really working with communities on the ground. So I was working in the bayou in Louisiana right after the oil spill. And I was working with communities that were pretty low income and had a lot of impacts from sea level rise and erosion. But that wasn't their main focus every day, right? They were worried about, their jobs and feeding their family and putting gas in their car. And so I really learned a lot about how do you speak about environmental issues with communities that maybe that's not their focus. And so that's when I first started realizing, oh, I really like this science thing, but I really like working with people too. And how do you put those two things together? So I went back to Duke, and I finished my master's degree, and I was looking for a job after I graduated. Still didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, but this job at North Carolina Sea Grant came up, and it was actually with a program funded by NOAA called the North Carolina Sentinel Site Cooperative. And so that position was looking at the impacts of sea level rise in coastal North Carolina, both on coastal habitats and coastal communities. So how do we bring those things together to build more resilient communities? And this was 10 years ago, when we didn't even use the word resilience. So that's when I started thinking, yes, there are jobs out there that can do the science and put the people and the economy together. So long story short, I worked for North Carolina Sea Grant. I started there in 2018 in a position for the North Carolina Sentinel Site Cooperative. A couple years later, a new position opened up at North Carolina Sea Grant called the Coastal Resilience Specialist, and here I am now. So I've been in that position, I guess, about 5 years now, but with Sea Grant about 7 years. And it's been an absolute privilege for me to work for Sea Grant. I'm excited to tell you about some of that work. One more thing I was going to let y'all know, and part of my resilience journey in my life, is that I am also an elected official. I am a town commissioner for my town of Beaufort, and that happened about a year and a half ago. And that's really cool, because I'm getting to put into practice a lot of the resilience work that I do in my Sea Grant job as well. So what do I do in my job? I am the Coastal Resilience Extension Specialist. And so I know y'all probably learned some about Sea Grant this summer, but as an extension specialist, what I do essentially is translate and connect the science and the policy with people that can use it. So this is a very involved process, and it's about working with people. So it really means that you have to build relationships, which takes a lot of time and trust, and you can easily lose that trust with people. You have to be a trusted source of information, so that people know this information they're getting is going to be able to be applied to the work that they do. And then the two-way communication and dialogue is really important. You can't always be talking at people. In my job, you really have to listen a lot. And that's one of the things that I've really learned. And doing this job now for over 10 years, those relationships, they take a really long time to build, and they take a lot of listening. So Sea Grant overall, we conduct research. We do extension, which again is connecting science with people that can use it. And then we also do education as well. And I work a lot in this resilient communities and economies spaces. There's also the healthy coastal ecosystems, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and environmental literacy and workforce development. And so Sea Grant, it's really cool. So I work in North Carolina right here. I'm right here on the coast. But y'all are here in Ohio. Here's Ohio Sea Grant in Columbus, but you're up here on Lake Erie. We are part of a whole network that works together. And I have worked with people from Hawaii, Alaska, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, California. So it's really neat. We get to share information across the network. I worked a little bit with I cannot think of his name from Ohio Sea Grant last time, Scott on some resilience work. Okay, so why is North Carolina such an awesome place? We have over 12,000 miles of estuarine and ocean shoreline. It's a great place to live, work, and play, and we have these extensive natural resources that support our coastal economy and our growing population. And so just to orient y'all, since you're in Ohio, if you're not familiar with North Carolina, we are a very long state. So in the western part of the state, we have the mountains. And then in the middle, we have the Piedmont where the capital is, Raleigh. And then on the eastern North Carolina, this part right here, we have the coast of North Carolina. It's very long. The city of Wilmington is in the south. Where I live, Beaufort is right here in the middle. And then we have the Outer Banks here. And the other really cool part about where I live, so this is the middle part right here. If you go back, we're going to look at this part right here. Where I live in Beaufort, right here, we have the Duke University Marine Lab, and then right down the road, we have the UNC Marine Lab, the NC State Marine Lab where I work. We have the National Seashores, we have state fisheries, we have state coastal management, we have the state aquariums. It is a hotbed of marine biology research. And then Beaufort. Why do I love Beaufort so much? So this is where I live, and this is actually my alma mater right here. This is the Duke University Marine Lab. Right next door is the NOAA Beaufort Lab. So we also have the federal NOAA lab. It is just an awesome place. There's something about it that just sucks you in and you don't want to leave. So historically, the town of Beaufort and a lot of eastern North Carolina has been built on the whaling industry, commercial fishing. That's a lot of the money that built up this area. But recently, we have a lot of tourism, similar to what you see out here, that has really grown the local economy. So now we're really tourism based, and this is downtown Beaufort. We have ferries as well that go over to our national seashore and our state reserves. And this is the Rachel Carson Reserve, which is adjacent to the town of Beaufort. It is both a National Estuarine Research Reserve and a state coastal reserve. This is one of the islands next to Beaufort that has wild horses, about 25 right now. There's about 200 species of birds that use the island over the course of the year. It's used for research and education. And I'm going to show you another map. But if you look at these sand dunes right here, these are very important, because right here is the Atlantic Ocean. This is Beaufort. This is the Rachel Carson Reserve. You can see that it acts as a protection for the town when you get storm surge and hurricanes that come in this way and bring in wind and storm surge. And so these sand dunes are really important for protecting the town, but we have seen them become lower over time. And so there is worry about the protection of Beaufort because of the loss of these sand dunes. And so you can see right out here is the outer barrier island, Shackelford Banks. And so this is the second island next to Beaufort that also has wild horses. This one has about 100 wild horses. It is about 8 or 9 miles long. We've had a lot of erosion there as well. And so that's why I can hold so many more horses. And so this is a very big tourist spot for where we live, part of the National Seashore. And you'll see here, this is Shackelford Banks where the horses live. You can see the Atlantic Ocean here and how important these barrier islands are for the protection of the mainland here when we get those hurricanes, when we get that storm surge. So that is a, really big part of building a resilient community is making sure that we have those resilient barrier islands. And so this is part of Cape Lookout National Seashore. So the lighthouse is right down here, and you can see it's called Barden's Inlet. And last year, the National Park Service worked with the county to do about a $7 million dredge project where they did dredge some of the waterways and the inlet, and they put the sand right here on the beach. So this is an older picture. And so part of that was to protect the lighthouse, but also to allow boats and ferries to come in here for, commercial, for fishing and tourism purposes. And the lighthouses are a very big tourist draw as well in North Carolina. So that's all great, but we all know there are changes happening in our environment. And so this map shows sea level rise vulnerability. And so right down here again, this is Beaufort. This is Cape Lookout right here. These are the Outer Banks, and you can see the more red areas are more vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal inundation. This area up here, this very big red area, a lot of that is Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, and that is a very low lying area, as are, you can see, the Outer Banks, which also act as a barrier for the mainland. So how much are sea levels rising? So in Beaufort, we have a NOAA tide gauge that measures water levels every day, and it's been measuring the water level in Beaufort since 1953. And so you can see this trend. It's going up over time. Right now, it is the relative or local sea level rise trend in Beaufort is 3.62 millimeters per year. I think when I started this job, it was about 3.15 millimeters, something like that. That doesn't sound like very much, but if you think of a penny, if you stack 2 pennies on top of each other, that's about 3 millimeters. So if every year you're stacking 2 or more than 2 pennies on top of each other, all of a sudden we're going to get a change of over a foot of sea level rise in the next 100 years. So why is that important? So this is downtown Beaufort. Right on the other side of this building is the channel. You can see the high tide flooding here. So we know that climate change is already impacting coastal towns in North Carolina and across the country. We know we have more intense storms, we have greater rainfall, we have rising sea levels. What does that do for small coastal towns? We call climate change a threat multiplier because it's not just one thing that's happening at a time. All of these things are happening and they're compounding their impacts. So when sea level rise, when the water rises, it also impacts things such as erosion, inundation, groundwater systems, and water quality. And we know these impacts are happening right now and that they're going to continue to get worse. So we talk a lot about hurricanes in coastal North Carolina, but I think one impact that we don't always think about as much are the chronic impacts of climate change. So this is, if you look at the map, remember this is Beaufort here, Cape Lookout, and then Cape Lookout National Seashore. There's a string of communities right here called Down East North Carolina, historically commercial fishing, families, communities, very low lying. We are seeing the proliferation of these, what we call ghost forests in Down East North Carolina. So these are caused by saltwater intrusion. So it might not be that, all of a sudden all the trees are dead, but they might slowly be impacted by saltwater intrusion. And then you see these ghost forests. And some people who live down east think, oh, these are from hurricanes, but that's not really what's happening. These are from saltwater intrusion. So that's part of the education that has to happen as well about these more chronic impacts of sea level rise. Of climate change, I'm sorry. But it's not just about climate change, right? We have other challenges on top of climate change in coastal North Carolina. People love coastal North Carolina. They want to move there. So we have a lot of growth and development, which is great. And we have tourism, but we have to think about how do we balance the community needs and priorities with a growing population. And we have a lot of aging infrastructure. We have a lot of second homeowners. My town, Beaufort, we were really excited. We all voted for this national competition back in 2013. I think I had just moved there 2 years before that. And we all went online and yes, Beaufort's the coolest small town in America. And then we won. Yay. But then people found out about us And then they started moving there and visiting, and people during COVID realized they could work remotely. I kid you not, every time I go to a conference, it doesn't matter where in North Carolina, and often outside of North Carolina, as soon as they hear I live in Beaufort, oh, we want to come there. Oh, we want to visit there. Oh, we want to move there. So, oh, you do? Okay, you and all your friends, right? So you know, there's a lot of things to consider. So now we're going to talk about resilience. So again, I'm the coastal resilience specialist, and when I was in graduate school, my internship was on resilience. My master's project was on resilience. This was back when nobody talked about resilience. Now everybody talks about resilience, and we say, okay, well, we need to define it. If you don't define it, it doesn't mean anything. So I'm sure you all have heard all of this. When I started doing this work, we thought about resilience in the terms of how fast and in what fashion a system can bounce back from a disturbance, like a hurricane. So, you know, how fast can you rebuild that house or that community? Or how fast does the water quality go back to what it was before? Those kinds of questions. Now, resilience is often looked at, how can we bounce forward after a disturbance? So let's not rebuild to the previous levels or try to go back to the way it was before. How can we make it better after the disturbance, after the hurricane, so that we're more prepared for the next disturbance? And so in my job, I really focus on community resilience and ecosystem resilience. This is a very eerie photo to me because this is where I live, downtown Beaufort, and there's not a single boat in the harbor, which I have never seen in my life, except this photo is 2 days before Hurricane Florence in 2018. So all the boats had to leave the harbor. If the hurricane's predicted to have a certain amount of wind speed, you have to leave. I'd lived there since 2011. I had never seen this before. So that was weird because it's like, are they going to come back? What's the town going to look like afterwards? Remember, I'm a kid from Shaker Heights. I was like, what are these hurricane things, right? This was my first major hurricane. And at the time, my boyfriend was like, you need to take everything out of your fridge. I'm like, why would you do that? Well, because there's going to be no electricity. I was like, okay, but it'll be fine for a few. No, there's going to be no electricity for like, you have no, like, it could be a couple weeks. And I was like, oh, so I went through, I didn't even, and put water in your bathtub. I didn't know that. So it was a really strange time because we left Beaufort not knowing what we're going to come back to. And me not being from down there, like, I didn't really realize, like, it's not a vacation. It's super stressful because you don't know what's going to happen to your house. You don't know what's going to happen to your friends, your family, your community. So it was a strange time. So Hurricane Florence was incredibly destructive in North Carolina. It made landfall in Wilmington, North Carolina. It was not a high wind storm, but it was a high rain storm, and it just sat on top of us, I think maybe up to a week. So it just sat and sat and sat, and it dumped rain on us. This is New Bern, which is about 45 minutes inland from the coast. It got a lot of damage. The storm surge came up the river. A lot of the inland communities were hit very hard. There was over $22 billion of damage in North Carolina, $100 million in New Bern. A lot of these communities are still rebuilding from Florence today. And I wanted to show you all a map just to show you, this is New Bern right here. So again, here's Beaufort. So you can see how far inland it is. This is the Trent River that goes in there. And so it's not just towns right on the coast. It's actually often those inland communities that get really hit hard by the hurricanes. So what did we do after Hurricane Florence in North Carolina? So that was 2018. I'll give you another fun tidbit. I started my job at Sea Grant 3 weeks before Hurricane Florence. I moved into my new office at NC State, and the room I thought I'd made, I was like, this is like, my office is awesome. I have a view of the water a lot like this. And then 3 weeks later, my office shut down for like over a month. Oh, and then we had our Sea Grant site review that month too. That was crazy. We also had a very forward-thinking governor, Roy Cooper, who after Florence issued Executive Order 80, which was called North Carolina's Commitment to Address Climate Change and Transition to a Clean Energy Economy. So that was in 2018, I think a month or two after Florence. It laid out a lot of really specific things that state agencies needed to do to start planning for climate change. One of those was the North Carolina Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan, and that was a collaborative effort by many people, many agencies. Sea Grant was one small agency that had a part in that resilience plan. I helped work on it, and basically it was a plan forward for what are we going to do for resilience in North Carolina, not just coastal North Carolina. Out of that resilience plan came the North Carolina Resilient Coastal Communities Program that was started in 2020. That's a lot of what I do in my job now, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later. So since the executive order in 2018, there's been a lot of really great work in North Carolina on resilience. We're really starting to implement a lot of those actions now for resilience. So this is probably the most busy slide I have today, so just bear with me. I'm not going to read everything to you. These are some things that we talk about, and I think about a lot of what can we do for building resilience. And I thought about this too, because I think this is not just about North Carolina or Beaufort or even the East Coast. I think there are things, you know, around the country in the Great Lakes of how do we continue to build resilient communities and economies. That's one of the big focal areas for Sea Grant. And so I think it starts at the top, all hands on deck, right? No matter if you're a biology major, a chemistry major, environmental science, political science, economics, whatever you do, none of these things exist in a vacuum. We've started working a lot with engineering and consulting firms through the resilience program. Everybody is important, right? There's no one size fits all solution. There's no one thing that's going to solve this. It's got to be everybody thinking about these things and how do we implement them. That does make it hard though, because there's not one thing, right? There's no one thing that's going to fix it all. The people, environment, and economy, I think that's really important. That's, you know, the triple bottom line. I have seen in my career sometimes the environment get pitted against the economy. If we do something good for the environment, it's not good for the economy or vice versa. I like to think of how do we find those win-win-win solutions that benefit people, environment, and the economy. I'll say we think about this a lot in coastal North Carolina, meeting people where they are. So not trying to force people to do something they're not ready for or not ready to talk about. You can do it, but it's usually not effective. So a lot of it is educating people, listening a lot, and working with them at the stage that they're at. I am going to highlight this bottom one too. Help in buying time to protect these special places. So you've heard me talk about Beaufort. Obviously, it's my home away from home. I love it. It's a really special place. There's many special places in coastal North Carolina, Cape Lookout National Seashore, the Rachel Carson Reserve, many, many other places. A lot of those places are very much at risk. And so I've heard a lot of the stakeholders and communities I've worked with over the past 10 years, we have started to talk about this a little bit. How can we buy time to help protect these special places? They might not be around forever, but what can we do right now to keep it going 10, 20 years? What can we do right now? So. All right, now I'm going to get into what does Sea Grant do in resilience? What is our role in North Carolina? Again, remember Sea Grant, we fund research. We do our own research as well. I'm an extension specialist. I'm connecting people with the science so that they can use it. And then obviously education and outreach is hugely important as well. So this is a really cool project. It's called the Sunny Day Flooding Project, and Sea Grant has funded parts of this project. I've been worked with the research team a lot. They are out of North Carolina, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and also NC State University. And basically what they're doing is they're looking to see how much it's flooding on land versus out in the ocean. And so they have installed a water level sensor in the drain right here. And there's also a camera right here. You can actually go to this website, Sunny Day Flooding. I don't remember what the URL is, but you can Google it. And you can look at the camera right now and see, is it flooding on the road? They were just written up in the Washington Post a couple weeks ago. What they have found is that it is flooding more on land than the tide gauges that are farther out are recording. So there's things like precipitation, groundwater, municipal infrastructure that's impacting flooding. And the town of Beaufort actually was getting about 25 of these sunny day flooding events per year. So this flooding is not from a storm or a major storm. This is just the water coming up through the drain, the drains right here. So we already have higher water levels because of sea level rise, and then we've got maybe a minor storm or just a sunny day with this flooding. And so this is obviously really impactful because you can't drive down the street. You can't get to the store. You can't go to the hospital. You can't get your kids to school. And so this research team is looking at how do we use this to help municipalities make decisions about what to do. So the town of Beaufort actually, after this research project started, they installed right down here a backflow preventer, and that has seemed to be working the past couple of years to cut down on the number of sunny day flooding events. But those tend not to be they can become less effective over time. And really cool thing about this project, the researchers from NC State and UNC came and talked to the town of Beaufort in their town meeting actually just this Monday about their research. So that is absolutely a, Sea Grant value of making sure the science is being communicated to the decision makers. So we also, Sea Grant funds a lot of salt marsh research. That's really important. Salt marsh is a very important habitat in North Carolina and the East Coast. This right here is called a surface elevation table. It is a tool for measuring how much the marsh is either building up or sinking. So that helps us know, is the marsh keeping up with sea level rise? So this gets back to that intersection between ecosystem and community resilience benefits. So we know that salt marshes are really important in North Carolina because they slow down and absorb wave energy. So if you look at this, when the hurricane comes in, the storm surge comes in here, all of this infrastructure behind here is better protected because of that salt marsh. Along with salt marshes provide other benefits such as habitat, recreation, water quality, shoreline protection, and carbon storage benefits. So Sea Grant also funds a lot of research on living shorelines, which is a type of shoreline, a natural shoreline. And so this right here is a hardened structure. It's called a bulkhead. And over the past 10 or 20 years, there's been a lot of research in North Carolina on the benefits of these living shorelines. We actually Sea Grant helped fund and start a Living Shorelines Academy at our community college last year, and that's been very popular. I want to put this example in here. This I think is really cool. Beaufort put in some stormwater improvements on one of their main streets right here. These were not here before, these natural elements. And this is supposed to help as the storm goes into the storm drains, which is not far from the ocean, right? Slow down, soak up, spread out the stormwater. So this is a really cool resilience measure by our town. And then I'm just going to say this one more time, that intersection of community and ecosystem resilience. So if you can identify those nature-based solutions in the middle that help both the ecosystems and the communities, that's really where we can find those win-win solutions. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about tonight is the North Carolina Resilient Coastal Communities Program. And like I said earlier, this came out of Executive Order 80 and how are we going to build more resilient communities in North Carolina. So this is a really cool program. It started in 2020 with both a federal grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and it has gotten continuous funding from the North Carolina State Legislature as well. So it is a nonpartisan effort, or not. It's supported by nonpartisan in North Carolina. You can see we've had over 40 communities in coastal North Carolina go through this program since 2020. We had over 20 new communities that just applied a couple months ago to start in the program as well. So this is really neat because we're engaging local municipalities and counties in planning for resilience. And so Beaufort was one of the first communities that went through this program back in 2021. And what we heard at the state level and the local level from small communities in North Carolina. So Beaufort has about 5,000 people, but we have even smaller communities in North Carolina. And maybe they have 10 people on their town staff. They probably don't have the technical expertise to plan for resilience, unlike bigger cities. And so what we really heard before we started this program, what the state really heard was we need outside technical assistance to help plan for resilience. And that's really the resource that this program provides to towns in coastal North Carolina, is that outside resilience planning and resources. And we found that to be very popular with communities up and down the coast. And I think this is my last slide. So I want to bring it back to Beaufort one more time. So what we're learning is it's really important to balance growth with responsible coastal management and resilience. And so Beaufort went through this RCCP, the Resilient Coastal Communities Program. They're continuing to leverage that program. Their land use plan incorporates climate change, sea level rise consideration for building in vulnerable and low-lying areas. They also received another grant from the state program in which they're going to incorporate resilience into the update of their town ordinances. And so those are the municipal laws that say what you can do, what the land use is allowed in your town. It's a lot of work, but it's really important. And I think it's, it's really important when you look at what we have here. So the more you plan for the future, I think the more prepared you're going to be. And that's it. And this is me doing one of my favorite things, paddleboarding. I don't do it as much as I would like anymore, but.
Okay, at this time, we'll take questions. So if you, so Sarah, if you could just repeat the question for the
Okay.
folks.
Yes.
From West Virginia, there's a lot of similar low-income communities and issues with flooding or toxic water or drinking water. What are some of those tactics or programs kind of similar to the Sunny Day or different that you use to like reach out to that community, but also stress the emphasis of like the environment is in danger and you're in danger because of that?
Okay, so I think the question is, how do you work with local communities so that they will hear you? Did I just rephrase it? That's a really, really good question. So that gets back to what are the extension principles 101, I think. And it goes back to when I lived in Louisiana, because remember, I'm a kid from Shaker Heights, and you go down there and you see these people living in the bayou, and it seems kind of crazy. Like, why do you live down here? Why don't you just move? But can you imagine if I had walked in there and said that? They'd be like, okay, we don't trust you. So they'll like, no, I'll go back to the number one thing you do is you listen, right? And you don't judge, and you go in with a really open mind. And I mean, I think that will take you really, really far. Now we can talk about things like communication best practices, right? So in climate change communication, it's always changing, but generally one of the things that they say is it's not very effective to go in and try to scare people about what's happening. Now you could probably argue back and forth, but that's generally what I've seen from, expert climate communicators is the more you scare people, the more they sort of pull back and they feel like they don't have any agency. So you have to find a different way. There are communities that we work with in coastal North Carolina that we know there would be words that we would use that would be non-starters, like climate change. So you think about other ways to communicate, like flooding. You can say silver rise, coastal inundation. I've also found it really helpful to think about what you have in common with a community because, I live in coastal North Carolina. I love it. It's beautiful. I love being on the water. That's usually if somebody lives there, they feel that same way too. So I think it's just being really thoughtful about who you're working with, what's important to them, what are their values, and just going in with an open mind. Now that wasn't super specific, but all communities are very different. So there's no I don't think one thing you can do. You have to think about who your audience is. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
About the Living Shorelines project we were talking about. I was wondering how much of the implementation you've been seeing and if you've been seeing any big changes from it or what that implementation looks like in general.
That's a really good question. So I will say I didn't really put these details in, but we've had a lot more living shorelines constructed just in the past 5 years. That's because, and I don't remember the exact year, but I think it was around 2019. The state permitting was a lot more challenging. It would take months to get a permit for a living shoreline as compared to a bulkhead, you could get a permit in a day. There was a lot of really great work by a lot of agencies, the state of North Carolina, and they streamlined the permitting process. Now you can get it almost as quickly as a bulkhead. I say that because, so that means we don't have a lot of data and research on these living shorelines. However, there are a lot of really good researchers. I work with one at East Carolina University that have looked at the effectiveness of living shorelines, and what they are finding is that it's actually often cheaper to install, and also there's less maintenance over time, as well as there's less damage after a hurricane. So there are some places, if it's like really high wind energy, really high wave energy, that might not be, or maybe the angle, they might not be the best place for a living shoreline, but the places that are suitable for a living shoreline, they're finding that they are more effective. You know, the research has to continue to see, well, what are the best types of substrates? Where do you put them? How do you construct them? There's a lot more private companies getting into the industry too, now that they're realizing, oh, there's money to be made from that. It's still a lot smaller than the bulkheads, but hopefully that will continue. A lot of it is education as well, because people look at a bulkhead and they think, oh, that looks really neat and tidy. It looks like it's going to be really effective, whereas this marsh looks really messy. And so a lot of it is changing people's perceptions as well. That's okay.
Like the bulkheads into living shorelines, like is that a possibility, or is that not so much looked into?
That is absolutely a possibility. Do I see that happening normally? Probably not. I do see the opposite happening though. There's still a lot of education, I think, to be done. Yeah. Although, again, they are becoming more well-known. There's some funding that comes from the state legislature for them. We have organizations that do education about them. So they are becoming more well-known than they were even 5 years ago. Yeah.
I don't really, so that you mentioned like city planning in the cycle before, I'm doing like a final project about like city planning in Cuyahoga County.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, like, has it been effective kind of in this area? If you've been involved in it, like, what do you recommend as a kind of way to like talk about city planning with officials and get them to kind of add more environmental aspects to their city plan?
Okay, so let me repeat that. I think you're asking about city planning and specifically here in Cuyahoga. Are we in Cuyahoga County? Okay. But in this area, and how do you talk to local officials and involve the environmental? So don't have much experience with planning here except for what I saw growing up. So somebody else, if they want to answer that for this area, they can. But the general part of how do you get the environmental aspects included in planning? I mean, I think every town, towns have town planners, bigger towns have more town planners, more resources. A lot of it can go to who's on the city council, right? And what their priorities are and what they want to see. And so that means who's voting for them, right? What are their priorities? Are you holding them accountable? Probably just how do we get them to think more about environmental things? Again, it's not just one thing, right? Like everything you guys are doing is so important. Sharing your science with those decision makers is really important. I think that's why Sea Grant is so vital. It's challenging though, because if you think about it, if you give like an elected official or, a town staff, like a 50-page paper, they're probably not going to read it. Just be honest. So you got to be really succinct about, how you present it. I think a lot of times the squeaky wheel gets the grease too. That's just my personal opinion. But being a really effective communicator, I think it is important. Let's do, yeah.
One little one that came open, over in the book.
Oh, cool.
Early 2000. They went from like COVID.
Okay. But they're still not from there. I'm not from there. I am from off. It won't matter how long I live there. I will never be from there.
So given the location of the Sea Grant and then all the other organizations around it, is there a lot of competition for the resources and everything, and how does Sea Grant like stick out to get said resources, or is it kind of really easy to share since it's kind of all the same?
Yeah. That, I think you're asking, where do our resources for Sea Grant come from, and is there competition? Is that, do you mean like funding?
Like, yeah, like NOAA and national
Mhm.
parks, right there, like.
Oh, in my area specifically, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing I didn't say is that Sea Grant is actually part of NOAA. It's kind of confusing, but we have a national NOAA, National Sea Grant office in NOAA in Silver Spring, Maryland. So each of the 34 Sea Grant programs get federal funding every year. North Carolina just got ours yesterday, yay, for this year. We also get state funding as well. So we're not directly competing with other organizations, although I guess if you think about the whole pie, maybe we all are competing. But I would say where I live, and we were joking about this earlier, so we have NC State, Duke, Chapel Hill, which are huge basketball rivalries. So like when they're in the triangle, they don't really get along. But I think out where I live, it's 3 hours east of there. We all get along. We all know each other. It's a small community. All the Marine labs work together. NOAA works, I work with NOAA all the time. I work with National Park. I work with the state. That is, I think, and I didn't say this on one of my slides, those partnerships, there's no way we could do any of this work without partnerships, because the grand scheme of things, we don't have that many resources, right? And so if we all existed in our silos, we would get nothing done. So it's a really, for the most part, a really collaborative environment. And I think another really cool thing about this field is that in the environmental field, people are generally in it because they care about it. And so you get people that are excited about their jobs, that want to work together, that want to share resources. At least that's what I found. Did that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
This is unrelated, but is there some sort of volunteering service that you do?
Well, so volunteering
volunteer.
opportunities? Oh, for Sea Grant. We have communication internships. We have other student fellowships. We have a website that has a lot of those student opportunities on it. So you can go check it out. I think that's probably similar to other Sea Grant programs. No, is it different here?
And sadly, we don't have any structured volunteer programs. I mean, we accept high school students from time to time to shadow alongside our biologists, but sadly, no structured volunteer program.
Yeah, ours are also probably more internship and fellowship oriented as well. However, we have other organizations in our area, like we have a coastal nonprofit that has volunteer opportunities, again, student internship opportunities. So there's various different opportunities where I live. Yes. Sure. So the question is, how is engineering being involved in resilience planning? So that's a really good question. So that resilience program that I talked about, I didn't really go through all the steps, but the first 2 phases are the resilience planning and identifying projects. Then the phase 3 is the engineering design. Phase 4 is the construction. So you can apply to the state for a grant to do the engineering design for whatever your project is. And this program really emphasizes those nature-based projects, partly because the federal funding is coming from NIFWIF, which they emphasize the green infrastructure. So it's really important that we have engineers, consulting firms that can do that engineering and design work, put that project idea on paper, and then you can go and apply for a grant to actually construct that project on the ground. And I think that's one of the neat parts of this program, is that a lot of times those planning efforts, they can take a long time. You can get a plan, it can sit on a shelf and nothing happens. We've already seen multiple projects from this program get constructed on the ground. So for example, a constructed wetland and a greenway for a community. That was one of the really cool projects that just got done. So I think that so I don't have an engineering brain. That's not my forte. And when I talk to the engineers and they say, oh, we can put this here or do this or grade it this way, okay, great. We need these people to be able to, you know, continue on the way of that puzzle. Mhm. So I'm very fortunate. The person who was in my position before me at Sea Grant, Just Whitehead, she was involved with this program since even before it got funded. So I sort of started and I get to be part of the steering committee that helps guide the decisions for this program. It is, you know, it's a state program, so they make all the final decisions. I have worked with communities on that part of the engineering design, but again, I'm not an engineer by any means, so I'm not the one that's, you know, out there writing the site plans or whatever. That's, you know, really the engineering. But we do have, you know, it's really dependent on which Sea Grant program you're at, what your skills are. There are, I think, some Sea Grant programs that have specialists that have more of those. We have a person in our North Carolina Sea Grant program that's in our biological engineering college, I think. And so she does a lot more of that type of focused work than I do. So it's really just depending on what your skills are.
All right, I have a philosophical question for you.
Uh-oh. Is it time to go? It's almost 8
Let me
o'clock.
Preface this with, this is our environmental policy
Okay.
professor, so.
Okay, 2024 Hurricane Helene devastates Asheville, North Carolina, which is the mountainous part of the state. How far away do you have to be from the coast? Do you consider, needing to have technical assistance for coastal resilience? In the absence of strong FEMA agency for federal emergency relief management,
Mhm.
what is the role of Sea Grant for cities like Asheville that do experience issues that are very similar to what typically a coastal community might experience?
So I'm going to start by saying just that was such a devastating hurricane. And it was, I mean, that was so hard to watch because we know what it's like to go through a hurricane, but we also know, like, take the food out of your fridge, fill your bathtub up, do all these things, like get all the stuff out of your yard. They were not prepared at all, right? So I just want to take a moment to say, like, that was really devastating and really sad. So I think you're saying what resources are available to towns like Asheville and other of the Western. So Sea Grant, you know, our main office is in Raleigh, which is 3 hours west of the coast. And we are always thinking of, like, how do all these coastal issues impact the coast? Because obviously the water comes from the mountains to the Piedmont to the coast, right? So we don't exist in a vacuum. But that being said, we're also only like a 25-person staff. So, like, we can't do everything. We can't be everywhere. Asheville is like 6-7 hours from my house. Like, it's a very big state. There was another program in North Carolina called the RISE program that also focused on resilience. It started about the same time as the RCCP. They started in Eastern North Carolina, and the idea was they were going to go and do the mountains and then do the Piedmont area, but that program did not get funded to continue. And so I think there is absolutely the realization that we need that type of work across the state, that resilience work. I think it's been focused at the coast first because that's what you think of first for coastal resilience. There was a state resilience, and you can go look it up. It's called the it's not the Clearinghouse. I'm blanking on the name. There's basically a state website for resilience for local town staff. And at first we were going to just do it for coastal North Carolina. And then we decided to widen it to the entire state because that is absolutely, like, we need to have resilience across the coast. And I'm not as familiar with the efforts in the mountains because I do focus in the coast. We have state extension people, but I don't think that there is like a Sea Grant for the mountains specifically. That's a good question. I don't know exactly what resources are available. Sorry, I didn't answer that very well. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe this is the last one, I don't know, but,
Okay.
something Chris Winslow said earlier today, I think he does, I want to see that, was that when you have all hands on deck, it makes for a lighter load. And you have a slide about how all hands on deck. And I'm wondering, how do you're an elected official, you're also doing North Carolina see that. How do you get all hands on deck? And
It's like, new population.
It's hard. With a good attitude and a good spirit. No, but all joking aside, I think we need more people like us in decision-making roles, which is an interesting thing for me to say because I'm here as a Sea Grant employee today and Sea Grant is there to provide the information for decision makers, right? That's our role. But I have found as an elected official that, you know, it is really important that we have people in those positions that are willing to consider the science and take the time to use that science in their decision making. So that gets back to the people that we elect. It's hard. I'm going to be honest, it's hard right now. Everybody's really overwhelmed, right? I think for me, knowing the impacts that I can make at the local level right now, that's something that's in my control. There are a lot of things that are out of all of our controls right now. So I think finding that thing that you can control and working really hard on it and getting people involved. I mean, I have people now that like students at the Duke Marine Lab that want to get involved. And so how do we use that passion, right? I think that's really important. And I don't always do a good job at this, is kind of ignoring those things at the state or federal level that you can't control. I mean, you need to be informed, but you can get overwhelmed really quickly too. So remember, like, what are those things that you can control? And maybe you're going to show up to a town meeting, but maybe that's not the way you want to be involved. Maybe you want to go and do like volunteer work for your community in a different way. Or maybe you do want to be part of the town and you want to be in a volunteer position, like on a planning board or a Parks and Rec board. So kind of thinking about what works for you and how you can be involved. Some people really love social media and they're really good at it. I'm not that good at social media. If that's the way that you can get people involved, then I guess that's good too. But, you know, figuring out what your skill is and what you're passionate about.
Let's leave it on a high note
Yeah.
right there. That's
Yeah.
the question, Maria. Lots of good questions. Thank you all for your participation and your attention today. We've got a little bit of time before we have to head. I've got to get Sarah back to the lighthouse. She's got a 2-year-old toddler there waiting for her. So we'll probably leave here like at 8:30. So if you wanted to stick around, any of you want to stick around and chit chat with Sarah a little longer, that's fine too, but we'll officially end it here. Thank you for joining us online.
Introduce himself.